Rosalind Park pressed her palm against the greenhouse glass, watching frost crystals form at the edges despite the environmental controls working overtime. Station Beta 7 was experiencing another cold cycle, something that happened twice a year when their orbit took them through a particularly frigid region of space. Most residents barely noticed, tucked away in their temperature-controlled quarters, but Rosalind had learned to pay attention to the small signs of stress in living things. The tomato plants in Section 3 were wilting at the edges. The orchids near the east wall had stopped blooming. Life always found ways to tell you when something was wrong, if you knew how to listen. She was adjusting the humidity controls when she heard it. A sound so faint she almost missed it beneath the hum of the ventilation system. A small, distressed chirping, like a bird caught in machinery. But there were no birds on the station. Rosalind froze, tilting her head to isolate the sound. It came from somewhere beyond the greenhouse walls, maybe from the residential corridor that ran adjacent to her workspace. She wiped her soil-covered hands on her work apron and stepped out into the hallway. The corridor was empty at this hour. Most people were either at work or in the communal areas. The lighting was dimmer here than in the main sections, and Rosalind noticed for the first time how worn the carpeting looked, how several wall panels showed signs of repair that had never quite been finished. This was one of the older sections of the station, built in the first wave of construction 30 years ago. The chirping sound came again, clearer now. It was coming from Unit 247, just 3 doors down from the greenhouse entrance. Rosalind approached slowly. The door panel flickered with a weak orange light instead of the usual steady green. That meant the environmental controls inside were failing. She pressed the call button, but no chime sounded from within. The system was dead. "Hello," she called out, knocking firmly on the door. "Is anyone in there? Do you need help?" A crash sounded from inside, followed by a frightened squeak. Then silence. Rosalind's heart rate picked up. Someone was definitely in there, and they were in trouble. She pulled out her communicator and called building maintenance. "This is Rosalind Park in Section 7. I need someone to check Unit 247 immediately. The door system is down, and I think someone inside needs help." The response came back tired and bureaucratic. "We'll send someone when we can, Mississippi Park. We've got 17 other environmental failures in the older sections. Cold cycle always brings out the weak points." "There's a child in there," Rosalind said, though she wasn't entirely sure how she knew that. Something about the quality of that frightened sound. "Please hurry." She heard a sigh. "I'll bump it up the list. Give us 20 minutes. 20 minutes might be too long if the heating had completely failed." Rosalind looked up and down the corridor, then made a decision. She returned to the greenhouse and grabbed her emergency override keycard, the one the station had issued her because her work sometimes required after-hours access to various systems. Back at Unit 247, she hesitated only a moment before swiping the card. The door lock disengaged with a reluctant grinding sound, and the panel slid open halfway before jamming. Cold air rushed out, far colder than the corridor. Rosalind squeezed through the gap and immediately understood why the chirping had sounded so distressed. The quarters were freezing, well below what any living thing should endure. Her breath misted in front of her face. But worse than the cold was the state of the place. Water damage streaked the walls. The ceiling panels hung loose in places, and she could actually see her breath not just from the cold, but from a thin mist that suggested a serious leak in the life support system. "Hello," she called out softly. "I'm here to help. I'm not going to hurt you." A rustling came from behind an overturned table in what served as the living area. Rosalind moved slowly, carefully, the way she did when approaching a frightened animal in her garden. She found him huddled in the corner, trying to make himself as small as possible. He was a dragon child, perhaps 7 or 8 years old by human standards, though Rosalind wasn't entirely certain how dragon aging worked. His scales were bronze, duller than they should be, and he was shivering violently. His wings were folded tight against his small body, and his golden eyes watched her with a mixture of fear and desperate hope. "Hi there," Rosalind said gently, crouching down but keeping her distance. "My name is Rosalind. I work in a greenhouse next door. Are you here alone?" The child nodded, A very human gesture he'd probably learned from living on the station. Where are your parents? Where's your family? Papa went to work, the child whispered, his voice hoarse from the cold. He said he'd be back in 3 days. But it's been 8 days now, and the house got cold and the water stopped working, and I didn't know what to do. Rosalind's chest tightened with anger and concern. 8 days. This child had been alone for 8 days in these conditions. What's your name, sweetheart? Phoenix. He pulled his wings tighter around himself. Am I in trouble? Papa said to stay inside until he got back. I stayed inside like he said. You're not in trouble at all, Rosalind assured him, her mind racing. You did exactly right. But it's not safe for you to stay here right now. The heating is broken, and you're too cold. Will you let me take you somewhere warm? Phoenix hesitated, clearly torn between obeying his father's instructions and the physical need for warmth. His shivering intensified, making the decision for him. He nodded. Okay, good. Can you walk? I think so. But when Phoenix tried to stand, his legs buckled. The cold had sapped too much of his strength. Without hesitation, Rosalind moved forward and scooped him up. He was heavier than a human child would be, his scales and bone structure more dense, but adrenaline gave her strength. She wrapped her work jacket around him as best she could and headed for the door. Where's your papa work? She asked as they squeezed back through the jammed door. Mining station, the one by the big ice rocks. Phoenix's head rested against her shoulder, his body soaking up her warmth like a sponge. He fixes the machines that dig. The asteroid mining outpost. That was 3 days' travel from Beta 7 station under normal conditions. If there had been any kind of accident or delay, Phoenix's father might not even know his son was in danger. Rosalind carried Phoenix back to her own quarters, which were small but well-maintained and, most importantly, warm. She laid him on her couch and piled blankets over him, then immediately went to her kitchenette to heat water for tea. Have you eaten today? She asked, though she suspected she knew the answer. Phoenix shook his head. The food maker stopped working yesterday. I ate the last nutrition bar this morning. Rosalind's hands clenched around the kettle. 8 days alone, no heat, no working food synthesizer, and this child had been too frightened to ask for help. What kind of system let this happen? She made him hot soup, something mild that his system could handle, and watched as he ate slowly, carefully, like he wasn't quite sure the food was real. His color improved almost immediately as the warmth started working through his body. Phoenix, does anyone else know you're alone? Any neighbors? Any friends? He shook his head. Papa said we should keep quiet. He said sometimes people don't like dragons, and we should stay private. That explained so much and made Rosalind even angrier. Thorn, Phoenix's father, had been trying to protect his son by keeping them isolated. But isolation had nearly killed the child when things went wrong. Well, you're not alone anymore, Rosalind said firmly, sitting down beside him. We're going to make sure you're safe, and we're going to find your papa. But first, you need to rest and get warm. Okay. Phoenix looked at her with those big golden eyes, full of relief and gratitude that no child should have to feel. Thank you, he whispered. Thank you for finding me. Rosalind pulled the blanket up around his shoulders, tucking him in like her mother used to do for her. That's what neighbors are for. Now close your eyes and sleep. I promise you're safe here. As Phoenix drifted off, exhausted, Rosalind pulled out her communicator and started making calls. First to building maintenance, with considerably more force than before. Then to station administration. Then to the mining outpost coordinator. A little dragon's home had been falling apart, and no one had noticed. But that was going to change. Rosalind would make absolutely certain of it. The morning simulation lights flickered on across Station Beta 7, casting artificial sunshine through Rosalind's small quarters. She woke on the floor beside her couch, where she'd spent the night keeping watch over Phoenix. The young dragon was still asleep, his breathing steadier now, his bronze scales showing hints of their natural luster returning. Rosalind stood carefully, stretching out the kinks in her back, and went to check the messages on her communicator. 3 new notifications waited for her. The first was from building maintenance, time-stamped at 2 in the morning. Unit 247 has been flagged for emergency repair. Heating system completely failed. Water recycler damaged beyond immediate fix. Estimate 4 to 6 days for full restoration. 4 to 6 days. Phoenix couldn't go back there, not for almost a week. The second message was from station administration, bureaucratic and unhelpful. Child Welfare Services notified. Case file opened. Guardian must be located within 14 days, or child will be transferred to foster care on the main hub. Rosalind's jaw tightened. They'd take Phoenix away from the only home he knew, send him to strangers light years away, all because his father had been delayed at work. The injustice of it burned in her chest. The third message, however, brought a glimmer of hope. It was from Jackson Reed, the station's maintenance supervisor, and it was personal rather than official. Got your messages about the kid in 247. I'm coming by your place at 0800. We need to talk. I think I can help. Rosalind checked the time. 7:45. She had 15 minutes. She moved quietly around her kitchenette, preparing breakfast for two. Scrambled eggs for herself, and after a quick search on the station database about dragon dietary needs, she prepared a mixture of protein paste and heated fruit that the information suggested young dragons found palatable. Phoenix stirred as the smell of food filled the small space. His eyes opened slowly, confusion crossing his face before memory returned. His gaze found Rosalind, and his whole body relaxed. "You're still here," he said softly, as if he'd half expected to wake up alone again. "Of course I am. I made breakfast. Are you feeling better?" Phoenix sat up, the blankets falling away. His scales definitely looked brighter this morning, more bronze and less gray. "I'm warmer. My tummy doesn't hurt as much." "Good. Come eat, and then we'll figure out what to do next." They were halfway through breakfast when the door chime rang. Rosalind opened it to find Jackson Reed standing in the corridor, a large tool case in one hand and a genuine smile on his weathered face. He was in his 50s, with gray-streaked hair and the kind of practical competence that came from decades of keeping complex systems running. "Mississippi Park," he greeted. Then his gaze shifted to Phoenix at the table. His expression softened immediately. "And you must be Phoenix. I heard you had a rough few days." Phoenix shrank back slightly, uncertain of this new stranger. "It's okay," Rosalind assured him. "Jackson is here to help. He's going to fix your home so it's safe again." Jackson stepped inside, setting his tool case down carefully. He pulled out a small device that looked like a data pad, crossed with a scanner. "Mind if I ask you some questions, young one? I need to understand what's been happening in your quarters." Phoenix looked to Rosalind, who nodded encouragement. "It's all right. Tell him the truth." So Phoenix explained, in his small, hesitant voice, how the heating had started making strange noises 2 weeks ago. How his papa had tried to fix it, but said they needed to wait for official maintenance, because he wasn't certified for that kind of repair. How the water had started tasting funny, then stopped coming out of the taps at all. How the food synthesizer had displayed error messages before going dark. Jackson listened intently, making notes on his device, his expression growing darker with each detail. When Phoenix finished, Jackson sat back and let out a long breath. "Your home is in Section 7 Alpha," he said quietly. "That's one of the original construction zones. The whole section is due for renovation, but the station keeps pushing it back because of budget constraints." He looked at Rosalind. "What you found last night, that's not an isolated incident. We've got families living in conditions that should have been fixed years ago. Can you repair it?" Rosalind asked. "Can you make it safe for him?" "I can fix the immediate problems," Jackson said. "Heating, water, basic life support. That I can do today, maybe tomorrow. But the structural issues, the deep system failures, those need authorized work orders and official approval. And that takes time we might not have." Phoenix had been following the conversation with growing distress. "I have to go back there, even though it's broken." Jackson's expression gentled. "Not right away, kid. And when you do go back, it'll be much better than it was. I promise you that." A soft knock at the door interrupted them. Rosalind opened it to find a young dragon standing in the corridor, barely older than a teenager by dragon standards. His scales were a lighter bronze than Phoenix's, almost copper, and his wings were still growing into their full span. "Excuse me," the young dragon said politely. "I'm looking for my clutchmate." Someone at the administration office said he might be here. Phoenix's head shot up. Pip, you're here. The young dragon, Pip, pushed past Rosalind and crossed the room in 3 long strides, gathering Phoenix into a careful hug. Of course I'm here, you silly hatchling. Mama got a message from the station saying you were in trouble. She sent me ahead while she arranges transport. Phoenix clung to his older brother, and for the first time since Rosalind had found him, he started to cry. Not the quiet, frightened tears of a child trying to be brave, but the full, body-shaking sobs of someone who'd been holding everything in for too long. Pip held him, making soft crooning sounds that must have been comforting in their native language. He looked at Rosalind over Phoenix's head, gratitude and concern mixing in his golden eyes. Thank you, he said simply, for finding him, for keeping him safe. Anyone would have done the same, Rosalind replied, though she knew that wasn't true. Phoenix had been alone for 8 days before she'd heard his cries. Not anyone, Jackson interjected. I've been working maintenance on this station for 23 years. I've seen too many people walk past problems that weren't their concern. What you did, Mississippi Park, that took heart. Pip settled onto the couch with Phoenix still in his arms, waiting for the younger dragon to calm down. Our papa, he said to the room at large. Has anyone heard from him? Phoenix said he went to the mining outpost. I contacted them last night, Rosalind explained. They said there was an accident, a cave-in at one of the deep sites. No fatalities, but several workers injured. The whole operation has been on emergency protocols for the past week. Communication has been limited. Pip's face went pale under his scales. Is Papa hurt? They wouldn't give me specific names over general communication channels. But the coordinator promised to have someone reach out to family members directly within 24 hours. So we wait, Pip said, though his voice shook slightly. He was trying to be strong for his younger brother, but he was still just a kid himself, barely old enough to travel alone through space. Jackson stood up, collecting his tool case. While we wait, I'm going to do what I can about your living situation. Pip, how long can you stay on the station? As long as needed. Mama is coming, but it'll take her 5 days to arrange things with her work and book passage. She said I should stay with Phoenix. Make sure he's okay. Good. Then here's what we're going to do. Jackson's voice took on the tone of someone used to organizing complex operations. I'm going to get a crew together, and we're going to fix Unit 247 properly. Not just patch jobs, but real repairs. The kind that should have been done years ago. The administration will never approve the expense, Rosalind pointed out. Jackson smiled. It wasn't entirely friendly. Then we won't ask for approval. I've got vacation days saved up, and I know at least 6 other maintenance workers who owe me favors. We'll call it volunteer work. Community service. By the time anyone in administration notices, the job will be done. You do that? Phoenix asked, wiping his eyes with the back of his hand. Fix my home, even though nobody told you to? Kid, I've got grandchildren your age. I can't stand by and let you live in a place that could kill you. It's not right, and I'm too old to care about whether it's officially authorized or not. Pip looked at Jackson with something close to awe. We can't pay you. Papa's wages go to supporting our whole family back home. There's nothing extra. Didn't ask for payment, Jackson said gruffly. Just asked if you could stay and help keep your brother company while we work. Mississippi Park. I assume they can stay here for the next few days? Rosalind looked at the 2 young dragons on her couch, at Phoenix's hopeful face and Pip's careful attempt to hide his relief. Her quarters were small, barely big enough for 1 person, certainly not designed for 3. She'd have to sleep on the floor again. Her routine would be completely disrupted. It would be inconvenient in dozens of small ways. Of course they can stay, she said without hesitation. As long as they need to. The gratitude in both dragons' eyes was worth any inconvenience. Over the next 2 days, Rosalind's quiet life transformed into something chaotic and surprisingly wonderful. Pip turned out to be studying environmental engineering at a university on his home colony, and he spent hours in the greenhouse with Rosalind, fascinated by her work. Phoenix followed them everywhere, asking endless questions about Earth plants and human customs, his natural curiosity returning as he felt safe again. Jackson was true to his word. He showed up the morning after their meeting with 5 other maintenance workers, all volunteers, all ready to work. They descended on Unit 247 like a determined army, tearing out failed systems and installing new ones, patching walls and replacing corroded pipes. Rosalind brought them lunch from her small kitchenette, stretching her food budget to feed the crew. To her surprise, other neighbors started appearing. Mrs. Opal Winters from Unit 251 brought fresh bread from her food synthesizer. A human couple from down the hall contributed fruit and protein bars. Even people who'd never spoken to each other before started talking, united by the simple act of helping. "This is how communities used to work," Mrs. Winters said, sitting in Rosalind's quarters while Phoenix showed her his collection of stone specimens from various asteroids. "People looked after each other. We've gotten too comfortable letting the system handle everything." "The system failed Phoenix," Rosalind said quietly. "If Jackson hadn't helped, that little one would have been shipped off to foster care while his father was trapped in a mining accident. Then we make sure the system doesn't fail anyone else," Mrs. Winters declared. "I'm organizing a building council. We'll monitor the older units, make sure no other families are living in dangerous conditions." By the third day, Unit 247 was transformed. The heating worked perfectly, calibrated specifically for dragon physiology. The water ran clear and clean. New wall panels covered the water damage, and Jackson had even managed to upgrade their food synthesizer to a newer model he'd salvaged from Storage Depot. "It's better than before," Phoenix whispered, standing in his home's doorway. "It's really, really better." "That's because people cared enough to fix it right," Jackson said, ruffling the young dragon's head crest affectionately. "And if anything breaks again, you come find me immediately. Understand? Don't wait 8 days hoping it'll fix itself." "I promise," Phoenix said solemnly. That evening, as they sat in Rosalind's quarters sharing dinner, her communicator chimed with an incoming call. The ID showed it was from the mining outpost. Everyone froze. Rosalind answered, putting it on speaker. A tired voice came through, rough with exhaustion but unmistakably relieved. "This is Thorn, calling for my son Phoenix. Someone there said he needs me." Phoenix launched himself at the communicator. Papa, you're okay." "I'm okay, little Spark. Banged up a bit, but okay. I'm so sorry I couldn't call sooner. There was an accident, and communications were down, and I've been trying to reach you for 3 days. Are you all right? Is everything okay?" Phoenix looked around the room, at Pip and Rosalind and the remnants of their shared dinner. At the home he'd been so frightened in, now transformed into something safe and warm. "Everything's okay now, Papa," he said, and his voice held a confidence that hadn't been there 4 days ago. "I made friends. They fixed our home. They kept me safe until you could come back." Through the communicator, they could hear Thorn's voice crack with emotion. "Thank you," he said to the room at large. "Whoever you are, whoever helped my son, thank you. I'll be home in 2 days." "I'm coming home," Rosalind smiled, catching Jackson's eye across the room. The maintenance supervisor nodded, satisfied with a job well done. A little dragon's home had been falling apart, but a neighbor's kindness, multiplied by a community's care, had altered fate. Not just for Phoenix, but for everyone who'd chosen to help instead of looking away. The station's main transit hub buzzed with activity as Rosalind stood beside Phoenix and Pip, watching the arrival board. Transport Vessel 729 from the mining outpost was docking in Bay 12. Thorn would be walking through those gates in less than 10 minutes. Phoenix couldn't stand still. He paced in small circles, his tail swishing back and forth with nervous energy. His bronze scales gleamed under the terminal lights, fully restored to their natural brilliance after days of proper care and warmth. What if he's really hurt? Phoenix worried aloud for the 5th time. What if he can't walk right anymore? What if he's different? Pip put a steadying hand on his younger brother's shoulder. "Papa is strong. He'll be fine. And even if he's hurt, we'll take care of him. That's what family does." Rosalind smiled at the simple wisdom in Pip's words. Over the past 5 days, she'd learned so much about dragon culture, about the tight family bonds that held their communities together. Pip had explained how Clutchmates stayed connected their entire lives, how dragon parents often worked dangerous jobs far from home to support extended family networks across multiple colonies. He's going to be so surprised when he sees the quarters, Fenix said, switching topics as his anxiety sought new outlets. Do you think he'll like what we did? What if he's mad that strangers came into our home? He's going to love it, Rosalind assured him, and he's going to be grateful that people cared enough to help. The arrival gate chimed, and passengers began streaming through. Humans, several different alien species, and then Rosalind spotted him. Thorn was unmistakable, a larger version of his son's with darker bronze scales that bordered on brown. He moved carefully, favoring his left side, and his right arm was in a medical support brace. But his eyes scanned the crowd with desperate intensity until they landed on his children. "Papa!" Fenix broke free and ran, followed closely by Pip. Thorn dropped to his knees, his good arm opening wide to catch both his sons as they collided with him. The embrace was fierce and desperate, all three dragons making soft crooning sounds that needed no translation. Relief, love, and the simple joy of reunion filled those wordless noises. Rosalind hung back, giving them privacy for their moment. But Thorn's gaze found her over his sons' heads, and something passed between them. Understanding, perhaps. Gratitude that ran deeper than words could express. After a long moment, Thorn gently untangled himself from his sons and stood, still keeping one hand on Fenix's head as if to confirm the child was real and safe. He approached Rosalind with measured steps, his expression complex. "You're Rosalind Park," he said. "It wasn't a question. My sons told me everything. You found Fenix. You kept him safe. You organized help to repair our home." His voice cracked slightly. "You saved my son's life. I did what anyone should have done," Rosalind replied, uncomfortable with the weight of his gratitude. "But you're the one who actually did it." Thorn's golden eyes held hers. "I've been working on this station for 4 years. I kept my head down, kept to myself, tried not to draw attention because I was afraid. Afraid of prejudice, afraid of making trouble, afraid that if we seemed like problems, they'd find reasons to deny my work visa and send us away." His hand tightened on Fenix's shoulder. "That fear almost killed my son. The system failed you," Rosalind said firmly. "The older sections of this station have been neglected for years. You weren't the problem. The broken infrastructure was the problem." "Mississippi Park is right," came a new voice. Jackson Reed emerged from the crowd, apparently having tracked down Thorn's arrival time the same way Rosalind had. He extended his hand to the dragon in a human gesture of greeting. "I'm Jackson Reed, Station Maintenance Supervisor. Your quarters should never have deteriorated to that condition. That's on us, the administration and the maintenance department. We knew those sections needed work, and we kept putting it off." Thorn shook Jackson's hand carefully with his uninjured arm. "The boys told me what you did, how you volunteered your time, brought in a crew, fixed everything properly. Why would you do that? We're nobody special. We don't have influence or connections." "That's exactly why," Jackson said bluntly. "The people with influence and connections, they get their problems fixed immediately. But regular folks like you, like most of us, we get put on waiting lists that never end. I got tired of watching it happen. Your son's situation was the push I needed to stop complaining and start doing something." A small commotion near the gate drew their attention. Mrs. Opal Winters was making her way through the crowd, followed by an entire procession of neighbors from Section 7. The human couple from down the hall, a Centaurian family that lived 2 floors up, even the building superintendent who'd initially ignored the problem. "We wanted to welcome you home properly," Mrs. Winters announced, slightly out of breath from hurrying, "and to apologize. Some of us knew conditions in the older units weren't good. We should have pushed harder for repairs. We should have checked on your family when we knew you were working off-station." Thorn looked overwhelmed by the gathering crowd. "I don't understand. We've lived here for 4 years, and most of you have never spoken to us before." "That's our shame," the building superintendent said, stepping forward. His name was Harold Shun, and he looked genuinely remorseful. "I've been doing this job for 15 years, and I stopped seeing residents as people. You became unit numbers on repair requests. I'm sorry for that. It's going to change. We've formed a residents' council, Mrs. Winters added, her eyes bright with determination. Jackson has agreed to help us audit all the older units. We're going to document everything that needs repair and present it to the station administration as a united front. They can't ignore all of us. And if they try, Jackson said with a grim smile, we'll take it to the sector governor. I've been keeping records of safety violations for years. I've got enough documentation to cause serious problems for anyone who tries to sweep this under the rug. Phoenix tugged on his father's arm. Papa, they made our home beautiful. Wait until you see it. The water is hot whenever you want it, and the food maker has 20 new programs, and my bedroom doesn't have that weird cold spot anymore. Thorne's eyes were suspiciously bright as he looked down at his youngest son. Show me, he said softly. Show me what these kind people have done. The entire group made their way back to Section 7, filling the corridors with conversation and laughter. Rosalind walked beside Thorne, who moved carefully but determinedly despite his injuries. The mining accident, she said quietly. How bad was it? Bad enough. We lost part of Tunnel 17 when an old support beam failed. 3 workers trapped for 2 days before we could dig them out. I took some debris to the ribs and shoulder, but others had it worse. Thorne's expression darkened. The company will investigate, write a report, promise to improve safety standards. Then nothing will change because changing things costs money, and profits matter more than workers' safety. Not everything is like that, Rosalind said. Look at what happened here. People chose to act, chose to spend their time and resources to help your family. That matters. That changes things. Maybe you're right, Thorne said, though he didn't sound entirely convinced. They reached Unit 247, and Phoenix rushed ahead to open the door. Look, Papa, look at everything. Thorne stepped inside and stopped. His breathing hitched as he took in the transformed space. The walls were freshly painted in warm earth tones that dragons found comforting. The heating system hummed quietly, maintaining perfect temperature. The living area had been rearranged to maximize space, and someone had even added a few decorative touches. A new lighting fixture, curtains for the windows, a small rug in Phoenix's favorite color. We saved everything of yours, Jackson explained, coming in behind them. Nothing was thrown away without permission. Your belongings are all in the storage alcove, and we documented everything we did so you'd know exactly what was changed. Thorne moved through the corridors slowly, running his hand over smooth walls, testing the water in the kitchenette, checking the environmental controls. In his bedroom, he found his family photos carefully arranged on the dresser, exactly where they'd been before, but now properly lit and displayed. He picked up one photo in particular. It showed a female dragon with scales that shimmered like copper in sunlight, holding a tiny green hatchling while a slightly older bronze hatchling stood beside her proudly. Thorne's mate, gone 7 years now, lost to an illness that dragon medicine still couldn't cure. She would have liked you, Thorne said to Rosalind, who had followed him to the doorway. My mate. She always said humans had good hearts, that we should give them a chance instead of isolating ourselves. I wish I could have met her, Rosalind replied honestly. They returned to the living area, where Pip was showing Mrs. Winters the upgraded food synthesizer, and Phoenix was demonstrating how the new heating controls worked to Harold Chun, who listened with appropriate seriousness to the 7-year-old's technical explanations. Thorne cleared his throat, drawing everyone's attention. I need to say something. I've spent 4 years on the station, trying to be invisible, trying not to cause trouble or draw attention. I thought that was protecting my family. But all I did was isolate us, cut us off from a community that could have helped when things went wrong. He looked at each person in the room, his gaze lingering on Rosalind and Jackson. You saved my son, not just his life, but his spirit. Phoenix was so frightened when I left, afraid of being alone, afraid of the cold, afraid of everything. Now I see him explaining heating systems with confidence, smiling at neighbors, trusting that people will help if he asks. You gave him that. You gave us both that. We're neighbors, Mrs. Winters said simply. That's what neighbors do, or what they should do, anyway. We forgot that for a while, but your family reminded us. I want to help, Thorne said firmly. This residence council you mentioned, I want to be part of it. I work with structural systems at the mining operations. I can assess building integrity, identify problems before they become dangerous. If you'll have me, I'd like to contribute. We'd be honored, Harold Chun said immediately. We need people with technical expertise. Between you and Jackson and Mississippi Park, we'll have the knowledge base to really make a difference. I can help too, Pip added. I'm studying environmental engineering. I'm home for the winter break anyway. I might as well make myself useful. This is how it starts, Jackson said, a satisfied smile crossing his weathered face. One family in crisis, one person brave enough to help, and suddenly you've got a community that actually functions like a community should. Over the next few hours, the group talked and planned. They discussed inspection schedules, repair priorities, ways to pressure the administration into action. Phoenix fell asleep on the couch, exhausted by the emotional intensity of the day, while the adults continued their work around him. Eventually, people began to leave, promising to meet again in 2 days to begin the formal auditing process. Rosalind was one of the last to go, gathering her coat and preparing to return to her own quarters down the hall. "Rosalind," Thorne called out as she reached the door. "Wait." She turned back to find him approaching with something in his hands. It was a small crystal, roughly the size of her palm, that seemed to glow with an inner light of shifting bronze and gold colors. "This is a memory stone," Thorne explained. "In dragon culture, we give them to people who have profoundly impacted our lives. The colors represent my family, our gratitude, our promise to remember what you've done for us." He pressed it into her hands carefully. "It's not much, not compared to what you've given us, but it's important to us." Rosalind looked down at the crystal, watching the colors shift and flow like liquid metal. "It's beautiful. Thank you. Thank you," Thorne countered, "for seeing us, for hearing my son when he needed help, for proving that kindness isn't dead in this universe, just sleeping sometimes, waiting for someone brave enough to wake it up." Rosalind returned to her quarters that night, thinking about Thorne's words. She set the memory stone on her bedside table, where it cast gentle bronze and gold light across the walls. Through her window, she could see the greenhouse where she worked, the corridors of Section 7, where an entire community was waking up to its responsibility for each other. One small act of attention, of choosing to investigate a strange sound instead of ignoring it, had set all of this in motion. She thought about how easily she could have dismissed that faint chirping, how she might have convinced herself it was none of her business, someone else's problem. But she hadn't. She'd chosen to act, and that choice had rippled outward in ways she never could have predicted. Over the following weeks, the Residents' Council transformed Section 7. They documented safety violations, organized repair parties, and presented their findings to the station administration with such meticulous thoroughness that ignoring them became impossible. The sector governor got involved, funding was allocated, and suddenly the older sections of Station Beta 7 were getting the renovations they'd needed for years. Phoenix thrived. He made friends with human children in his building, taught them about dragon customs while learning about Earth holidays. His natural curiosity, no longer dampened by fear and isolation, blossomed into a genuine passion for learning. He spent hours in Rosalind's greenhouse, helping with the plants and asking endless questions about botany and biology. Pip returned to university with stories about human communities and the power of collective action. He incorporated what he'd learned into his studies, writing papers about cross-species cooperation and community-based infrastructure management. Thorne healed from his injuries and returned to work, but with a new perspective. He started advocating for better safety standards at the mining operations, using the same organizational strategies that had worked so well on the station. Other workers joined him, tired of being treated as expendable. Slowly, conditions began to improve, and Rosalind discovered that her life, which she'd thought was full enough with her plants and her quiet routine, had actually been missing something crucial. Community. Connection. The messy, complicated beauty of caring about people beyond herself. 6 months after that cold night, when she'd heard a frightened chirping through the greenhouse walls, Rosalind stood in the newly renovated community center in Section 7. The Residents' Council had fought hard for this space, and the station administration had finally agreed to convert an unused storage area into a proper gathering place. Children of multiple species played together in one corner, supervised by rotating volunteers. Adults sat in discussion circles, talking about everything from station politics to recipe exchanges. Mrs. Winters taught a weekly crafting class. Jackson held office hours for residents with maintenance concerns. And Thorne gave lectures on structural engineering, sharing his expertise with anyone interested in learning. Phoenix ran up to Rosalind, his scales gleaming with health and happiness. "Miss Rosalind, Papa says you should come to dinner tonight. He's making his special rice stew, the one with the spices from our home colony. Please say yes." "I wouldn't miss it," Rosalind promised, ruffling his head crest affectionately. She watched the young dragon scamper off to invite other neighbors, thinking about how much had changed. A little dragon's home had been falling apart, and in saving it, they discovered how to build something even more important. A community, a real one, where people looked after each other not because they had to, but because they'd learned how much better life could be when they chose kindness over indifference. The memory stone Thorne had given her still sat on her bedside table, glowing with bronze and gold light. But she didn't need it to remember. The evidence was all around her, in every smile exchanged between neighbors who'd once been strangers, in every child playing safely in well-maintained corridors, in every small act of caring that rippled outward to touch more lives than anyone could count. Sometimes fate could be altered by the simplest choice. The choice to listen instead of ignoring. The choice to act instead of walking away. The choice to care when it would be easier not to. Rosalind had made that choice one cold night, and it had changed everything. Not just for one little dragon, but for an entire community learning to remember what it meant to be neighbors again.